Well, good morning, folks. Well, I'm back in Midland after a quick trip to conduct a couple of days of classroom facilitation in Tyler, Texas this past week. Don't get me started about the amount of travel, or windshield time as I like to call it, that I had to do either. But as we get started this week, I want to talk about why I titled the show the way I did. First, and as we have discussed many times on this program before, there are too many lies that are coming from our government as they try to sell pieces of legislation to the electorate or to the voters. Second, there are just as many lies that come from those that are seeking elected office or seeking reelection to office. So I really want to focus in on a couple of those items specifically this week. I also want to let the audience know that I did get to spend this past week working side by side with an old shipmate of mine. It was fantastic to reconnect and deliver some leadership training and field coaching with my old pal from our time together on the Fleet Forces Fleet CPO training team. It was the Carlos and Larry Show 2.0. I shared a picture of us working together once again with our old teammates from those days, and they seemed to really enjoy it. I also want to let the audience know that I have spoken with a family member involved in what I believe to be the corrupt use of the government's power of eminent domain back home in Sevier County, specifically the city of Pigeon Forge. It is quite a story. And this family member is working out the details with their lawyer so that they can come on this program and let the audiences know exactly what is going on in that situation. I've also been in contact with another individual's team about a possible appearance on the program. You may have heard of him. He's former FBI agent and whistleblower Steve Friend. He is an example of truly taking a stand in the arena, sacrificing his job so that he would not violate his oath to the Constitution, and he eventually ended up losing his job and has been threatened with jail time just for exposing the corrupt and unconstitutional behavior of the FBI. I also have a separate weekly series in the works that will be on Facebook Live. Mr. John Gentry and myself are working out the details of how to get this thing off the ground, especially since I'll be spending a significant amount of time outside of Tennessee for the next 3 months working with my consulting business and my client. So stay tuned to the website blog, because on there, as well as on my social media accounts, I will provide updates about all of these upcoming events. If you would do me a favor in the interim, though, be sure to like and follow this podcast on whatever platform you use to watch or listen to it on. Be sure to hit the subscribe button on YouTube or Rumble channels and click the notification tab so that when you'll be notified when any new content is released. I'm on MeWe, Getter, Gab, Instagram, Facebook, X, formerly known as Twitter, True Social, Telegram, Gab, and even my professional page on LinkedIn. So, no matter the platform, ensure you select the notifications tab to keep up with the show. Between now and the August 1st primary, I will be generating much more content than I have previously. For now, though, here comes the standard disclaimer. The following content is approved by Larry Linton for TN 12, candidate for the GOP nomination for Tennessee House of Representatives, District 12, which is mostly comprised of Sevier County. And now I also feel the need to mention once again that I do not make any money with this podcast. So with the disclaimer out of the way, let's get on with this week's episode of the Liberty, Leadership, and Lies podcast. Again, good morning, folks. Just a short and quick episode this week as my time has been completely occupied with meeting the client's requirements for this current engagement. And as I mentioned in the opening, the travel involved this past week has been tremendous. The majority of this travel was going back and forth to the east side of Texas and back here to Midland. To start off with, let's talk about the title of this week's show: Lies, Choice or Entitlement, Embellishment or Lie. Many of my fellow Tennesseans have been closely watching what is going on with what is being euphemistically called school choice legislation in Nashville the past few weeks. I've been speaking with people that represent all sides of this issue for at least a month now, as well as listening to or watching podcasts from people on all sides of this issue as well. The liberals, the communists, Republicans, transpublicans, and ultimately true conservatives. These are the people that have read the Constitution, both the states and the central governments, and understand the limitations that the people who created our form of government then placed upon the government that we created. Created and can, because all governing power resides with the people, can abolish as well. It is written in our state's constitution and it formed the basis for the creation of these United States of America. So let's break down some of the arguments a bit, shall we? Supporters of this bill on the Republican side of the aisle, and yes, even some conservatives, are throwing their political capital behind the passage of Governor Lee's school choice proposal. Mainly because, and this is my opinion, folks, so take that for what it's worth, some, not all, mind you, but some of these Republicans and conservative politicians and organizations have become really enamored with this bill because of those words, school choice. Because if you're offering people a choice, it carries with it the semblance of freedom or liberty. After all, we are a freedom-loving people here in Tennessee, as well as across the Republic. Given the choice between freedom and tyranny, a vast majority of citizens will always choose freedom, which is why our government at the local, state, and central level, it is why our government has become so adept at lying about their pieces of legislation by naming them something that actually has nothing to do with what is contained in those bills. As a matter of fact, what is often contained in many of those artful lies end up robbing the people of their liberty. The title of the bill and the arguments used to sell the bill to the public is the spoonful of sugar that helps the medicine go down. If you're my age or older, you know what that phrase or that lyric means. The spoonful of sugar is the thin veneer of liberty that an apathetic electorate will not look beyond to see the actual details of the bill being sold to the people. It has been happening for generations now, all over the Republic. That is what I believe is happening with this school choice bill. Let's back up a little bit, though, first and consider that word choice. What is amazing to me is there are a lot of people that have really latched onto that word, choice, and is being used to sell government action. Have we, both as a state and a nation, really reached the point where we've become reliant on our government to give us choices? The people on all sides of the political spectrum are cheering the fact that government, an institution formed to secure the people's liberty, we are cheering the fact that our government is providing the people a choice when it comes to the education of our children. That is amazingly sad, and sad on two fronts. The first being the most obvious, and that is this: we as a nation have become so reliant on government that we celebrate when the usurpers of liberty in our states and our nation's capitals can sell us a quote unquote choice in the arena of educating children. That is sad because each and every one of us already have a choice when it comes to the education of our children. Right now, every parent of school-age children can choose between government indoctrination centers, private education institutions, and also every parent can choose to homeschool their children. These choices are available right now without any form of government intervention. Period. Full stop. Of course, choosing two of those three options comes at a personal cost. Private schools come at a financial cost to parents. Homeschooling comes at a cost of time as well as money. The financial burden of those two choices, other than the government institutions, is exacerbated by one primary reason among many others. Can you guess what it is? Well, I won't let you make you guess because I'll give you the primary reason, and that is government intervention in the free market. In the instance of private schools, it is supply and demand. Simple. There is a huge demand for a better education system, which has resulted in high costs for private education. Since private education institutions have to compete for an ever-growing demand for something better than government, they have to compete for something better than public schools for their children, costs rise. Add to that fact that these so-called public schools are thought of as being free. It's quite an uneven playing field. Government control of the education system in our nation and selling it as free has created an extremely unbalanced scale. People will automatically choose what they perceive to be the best bang for their buck. And since nothing is coming directly out of their paycheck for their children's education for these government indoctrination centers, the vast majority of parents send their children to these schools. Even though the quality of the product being produced by these schools has been declining for decades, despite the amount of taxpayer dollars spent per child in these brainwashing centers. Anything that is quote unquote free will definitely be inferior in quality than those items that have a higher cost associated with them. Again, it is simple economics, folks. Also consider the increases in cost per pupil over the past couple of decades. Has that produced a better educated population? How has our country's world standing in education? How has that been trending since the complete takeover of that system by the central government and their public sector union lackeys? I think we all know the answer to that, right? Most of those spending increases have not gone to better quality or more teachers, but instead have gone to administrators, counselors, and the corrosive, divisive, and sexualizing curricula that is present in the public education sector. Now, with all that being said, I'm going to take a quick break here and continue this train of thought in the next segment. Please don't go away because I will be right back. Okay, folks, we're back. As I said in the previous segment, it is amazingly sad that we as a people now look to our government to provide us with a quote unquote choice, especially when it comes to the education of our children. Also, as I mentioned, parents of school-age children already have choices as to what education system they can put their children into. The so-called public education system really doesn't have any competition since it is perceived as being free. There is, however, competition between the private schools for an ever-increasing demand signal, which has resulted in having high costs associated with it. Again, it is simple economics, folks. The private education systems or institutions not only have to compete among themselves for customers, they have to compete against a government-run education system that is perceived as free by nearly every single American. There's another factor, a government-induced factor, that has an effect on parents' ability to make the choice to send their children to private schools, as well as making the choice to homeschool their children. You see, government's intervention into the free market itself, as well as a confiscatory tax and fee system, has created a society and economy where both parents have to work outside the home to provide even the barest comfort or standard of living. Add to that the wasteful government spending and its ability to print money, which are the only, and now let me say this again for the commies in the back, I'll say it louder. Government spending and printing of money are the only things that cause inflation, which in essence is just another tax increase on the people. When our government chooses to interfere in the free market, that government action takes choices away from people. It erodes our liberty. So, parents of school-age children, when faced with three main choices already available to them, one, homeschool, two, private school, and three, government schools, they are financially forced to take the government school option. Not only because it's perceived as quote unquote free and therefore falsely represents a better financial decision for the family than private schools, and this is regardless of the poor outcomes achieved by these failing public schools, but also because both parents are already working outside of the home to try and maintain a barely comfortable standard of living for their families. So, government intervention in the free market, as well as it providing the quote unquote free school and eliminating competition between the public school system and the private school system, it has put the cost of private schools out of the reach for most families. But that same government intervention in the free market has not only affected private school choices by parents, it has also put in a misperceived roadblock in front of parents that would like to choose to homeschool. That roadblock comes in many forms as well. Parents that don't think they can homeschool because both of them have to work is the main misconception. But government enabled and facilitated messaging has also put up roadblocks as well. The government and its useful idiots in the public sector's teachers' unions, as well as the legacy media, has gone all out in their messaging about how homeschooling is full of religious zealots or about how children that are homeschooled are more socially awkward, both of which are outright lies meant to scare parents away from this option. An option, by the way, that is centuries older than the current model of government controlled education. Parents were educating their children long before the government stepped in and found education as just another method by which they could drain the sweat equity out of the citizens. Our government has bamboozled the electorate into believing that public education is free. I would like to remind the audience that there is no such thing as free, especially if the government is involved. It may only seem like it is free education because there's no direct cost coming out of your wallets, purses, or bank accounts to pay for these schools. Government schools are paid for by the taxes we pay. Whether it is property tax or sales tax or some other tax or fee vehicle, we do pay for it. All of us, which includes people that do not have any children enrolled in public schools. This is how the government has fooled a lot of people into thinking public education is free, and also how it has fooled a lot of people into believing that the other two choices are outside of their reach. But once again, I want to remind the audience, every single parent does have a choice now available to them on where they send their kids to school. And the other two choices are purposely placed out of reach for most parents by the government that provides the third choice. Isn't that nifty how it works? It is a facade of free education that has been in place since our government figured out a way to use it to rob us of our sweat equity and our liberty. All of what I just said is only the first way this argument over school rights is or school choice is amazingly sad. The second way is this. Governments all across the Republic are offering similar pieces of legislation or have already signed them into law, offering parents a choice in these education systems between private sector education and government sector education. And people on all sides of the political spectrum are eating up the spoonful of sugar, or they are denouncing it as some sort of government giveaway. What is not talked about a lot, and is amazingly sad, is that government is providing this school choice because the system they run is failing. What they are trying to sell is freedom or liberty. Do you see the irony in that? It is the government education system that has parents and their children trapped in the tyranny of something they created. They are attempting to sell people the idea that only government can provide them freedom from their own tyranny. Isn't that sad? Our nation was formed by a people that went to war against the most powerful country on earth so they could have freedom. Freedom from government controlling nearly every aspect of their lives. Now, here we are, 240 some odd years after we began that massive struggle, and won, by the way, 240 some odd years from the shot heard around the world from a people that said, we, the people, are the true repository of all government power, and we will govern ourselves. We are now at this point where our own government is trying to sell the notion that it will provide us money so that we can have the freedom to choose how our children are educated. As I said, that, ladies and gentlemen, is tremendously sad. Our government, the one that it was instituted to secure the liberty of the people, is now attempting to pass legislation here in Tennessee so the citizens can purchase freedom. They can purchase a choice in how their children can be educated. Now, what I'm going to cover in the next segment are my thoughts on other aspects of this bill that are particularly concerning. How I feel about Governor Lee's school choice bill and whether or not it should be signed into law may appear to fall in line with one particular political party or their aligned groups, but I want to be perfectly clear on this issue, and it will probably upset nearly everybody. Because where I stand on this issue, as well as every other issue being debated in the public and private arena, I want it to be abundantly clear. I will always side on the side of liberty and freedom of the people. I'm going to pause here for a quick break and then pick this right back up in the next segment. So stay right there, folks. I'll be back. And we're back for the third and final full segment for this week's show. As I said in the previous segments, I wanted to let the audience know exactly where I stand on Governor Lee's so-called school choice bill. But before I get into that, though, I need to let the audience know that I've been approached by many people and groups on this issue. I've listened to their arguments. I've researched it. That is one thing that I will always be, even after elected to office later this year and start to serve in the General Assembly next January. I will be transparent with the voters about the discussions I have concerning any piece of legislation I will have the opportunity to vote on. I will also let the people know exactly who is trying to pressure me in voting in such a manner as to erode the liberty of the people and to violate my oath of office. It is the Constitution and the voters that it represents that I will serve while in elected office. Not lobbyists, not corporations, or any other special interest groups. End of discussion. So let's get on with my position with a couple of questions for the audience. The first one is this. Is it within the government's authority to quote unquote sell or provide money from the Treasury to the citizens the choice between freedom and tyranny? Is that very concept antithetical to our state's constitution as well as to our constitutional republic? Is that not exactly what this bill is proposing to do? Our state government, and this bill becomes law, will provide parents with school-age children a sum of money per child so they can purchase a choice in where their children are educated. That does not sound like freedom to me. It sounds like bribery. Our government is proposing to bribe people by dangling freedom in front of them in the form of vouchers, and they will be paying this bribe with money from the government that they first extorted from the people. Wow, how our country has fallen, and it's fallen fast, hasn't it? The second problem I have is this. Does anyone in the audience know of any instance where the government, either state or central, any instance where the government has provided a monetary handout to the citizens where it was not an entitlement program? I'll wait for an answer. If you do know of any instance where there is not some sort of entitlement program, shoot me an email. The email address is larry@libertyleadershipandlies.com. Now, let me forewarn you, though, you will spend a lot of time researching that, and the answer you will come up with is no. There has not been any program in our government's history where they provided money to the citizens and it was not an entitlement program. And in the end, many, if not all of them, end up being unfunded liabilities for the government. The only way government can make up for the losses incurred in their entitlement programs is to take or to impose increased taxes and fees. Entitlement programs become a self-licking ice cream cone, where the government creates an entitlement program and it hands out tax revenue to the people. More and more people get on that program, causing government to raise taxes and fees to continue the handout of the entitlement. It's a Ponzi scheme. That is the only way for these government-created Ponzi schemes to survive. Why? Because the only way to fund these programs is through taxes and fees. Government does not create and sell a product to generate revenue. It has to insert itself into the free market by taking money out of the private sector and then redistributing it back to the private sector after taking out its cut to ensure that it continues to grow in size and scope. That's how it works. But thirdly, this selling or bribing the citizens with its own money for a chance to get freedom, I almost throw up every time I think about that. But when government bribes the people with its own money, it always comes with strings attached. The government always conditions its bribes. The conditions can come in the way of dictating certain behaviors, or it can come with conditions that If you accept the bribe, you can only engage in commerce with certain companies or organizations. Those companies and organizations that are often the beneficiary of the recycled bribe money also have to agree to certain conditions so that the government will allow them to accept the money that the citizens were bribed with in the first place. It's another self-looking ice cream cone. All of these ice cream cones result in one thing: government control, which means that the liberty of the citizens is given up. And in the case of entitlement self-licking ice cream cones, it creates more and more dependency on the government. The government is creating its own category of addicts. Really, really sad. The government is selling the illusion of freedom by bribing people with its own money and creating generation of addicts that will only look to the government for their liberty fix. As I said, many groups have approached me about this particular piece of legislation. While some of them acknowledge it isn't perfect and it's at least a start for the people to gain some control of their children's education, and it serves as a means to also get their kids out of these failing government schools. I agree, it's a start, but it is a start to another cycle of dependency where the government is creating those new sets of addicts because a lot of the people that are currently addicted to the public school model are recognizing it for the failure that it is. Government now has decided a new model is needed so that it can maintain control of the education system. How long do you think it will be before the conditions for the acceptance of the school choice vouchers by either education systems or parents comes with strings attached that will dictate the behavior of both of those? If we were to guess based upon the history of our government, it will be less than a generation. Also, pay attention to how the government is treating homeschool parents with this particular piece of legislation. The arguments are about whether to provide them with the same voucher amount and imposing some kind of regulations on them, which is tantamount to putting their kids back into a government-controlled school or education system. Or government will exclude them because they do not have the political capital yet to impose those same regulations on homeschool parents. In other words, our government is creating a set of second-class citizens not worthy of receiving the same entitlement as other children and parents, all because the government cannot exercise control over them yet. When it comes to government gaining control over every aspect of the citizens' lives, always use that word, yet, because that is what government has been doing for more than 100 years now, and will continue its attempts to do so going into the future. It will continue down that path until we, the people, finally say enough is enough. It's time to put the government at all levels back into its constitutionally limited box. Now that I made my thoughts clear, I'll be right back after this brief pause for closing out the show with God's word in the closing segment. So please stick around again, folks. And here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Our time together is coming to an end this week. I'll leave you with these thoughts in this closing segment, and we'll be back next Monday. Please remember to subscribe to the show on Rumble and YouTube. Don't forget to select the notifications link. That way, when I come out with material in between shows, you will be able to stay up to date with the podcast as well as my campaign. To sum up my position on Governor Lee's school choice bill, it is a hard pass, a definite no. At no time should the government be in the business of bribing people with their own money so they can purchase the illusion of freedom. That will always lead to tyranny, and along the way, it will create more debt and more people that become addicted to government as being the sole provider of freedom and rights. The opposite of the reasons our constitutional republic was founded. Now that I've explained my position, I want to get into the second half of the title of this week's show: embellishment or lie. Of course, that could be applied to the school choice bill being debated right now in the General Assembly, but it also applies to a topic I discussed earlier this week in my blog and on social media. In those posts I made about endorsements, I told everybody to be careful and exercise some discernment when it comes to those endorsements. We all need to start exercising some real discernment, both of the person being endorsed and the person giving the endorsement. If you peel back the layers of the onion, you will definitely find some embellishments, which, when you boil those down to what they truly are, they are just lies meant to convince the public. If a candidate or the person endorsing the candidate is called a strong conservative, please look up either their voting record or, in the case of the candidate, their public positions on issues before they became a candidate. If you cannot find those, there is a reason for that. Never forget that no input is an input. All right, folks, that is all I have for this week's show, and I thank each and every one of you for joining me today. Today's wisdom from God's word comes to us from James chapter 3, verse 6. The tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. If our government is trying to bribe us with our own money so that we have the ability to purchase a choice, they are selling a lie. We have choices already, some that are made out of reach by the very institution trying to bribe us to purchase their choice. Their tongues, which are selling the people their lives, they are corrupt. Not only are their tongues setting their lives on fire, they are setting our lives on fire by throwing our liberty, our freedom, into the fire pit so they can control us. We could turn the tide this election and every election. We can especially turn it here in Tennessee by electing those people that have a demonstrated fealty to the Constitution and the rights and the freedoms of the people it protects. Don't keep doing the same thing over and over by voting for the establishment candidate with embellished endorsements. Vote for the true conservatives that can choose to take a stand in the gap between the government and the people. Until next week, I humbly pray and ask that you stand in the arena with me. Reveille, it's time to wake up.